evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be with you tonight. My name is Bethany Yeiser. I'm president of the CURESZ Foundation, which of course stands for Comprehensive Understanding via Research and Education into Schizophrenia. This virtual lecture series was primarily for CURESZ clubs, which are located in Detroit, Toledo, and Cincinnati, but we're very proud and happy to welcome many of our subscribers. I'd like to introduce Dr. William Resch tonight. He is assistant clinical professor at the Ohio University Heritage College of Medicine, assistant program director at Ohio Health Riverside Psychiatry Residency, and he works day to day as an outpatient adult psychiatrist. So thank you, Bill. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Bethany, and greetings, everyone. I'm here in Columbus, Ohio, and it's a real honor and pleasure to be speaking to your group tonight. I've long respected Bethany and Dr. Nasrallah for starting this organization back several years ago. They do such great things. So thanks again for having me, and thanks for inviting me, Bethany. So I do try to keep these somewhat interactive. Bethany and I did test out the chat box, seems to be working. So if you need any clarifications, please put something in there. I'll do my best to watch for it. Additionally, to kind of keep things interactive and engaged, I do have 4 questions that I'm going to pose to the audience members during the talk. Just some simple questions to kind of get to know the audience and get them involved. So yeah, feel free to use the chat box. So when Bethany and I were kind of talking about what topic to come up with, I bounced a couple ideas off of her, and this one was the one that we ended up deciding on, and it ended up being a really fun lecture for me. I've learned a lot, and hopefully you'll learn a lot tonight too, but it's Healing Through Passion and Companionship, the Therapeutic Powers of Hobbies and Emotional Support Animals. So the first half of the lecture, probably 20-25 minutes, will look more about hobbies and kind of in the context of stress, how hobbies can be therapeutic and help us manage the day-to-day stress of normal life, highlight some recent studies confirming the benefits of hobbies on health and well-being. The second half of the lecture, about 20-25 minutes, will look at the historical origins of the human-animal relationship and the bond that's kind of ingrained within all of us, and distinguish the different terminology used around emotional support animals, which gets kind of blurred sometimes and leads to some misunderstandings there. And look again at some evidence and physiology on how emotional support animals can improve our mental health, how you might want to get a letter for one if you need one, and what that letter affords you and your animal. So, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end for question and answer. So I have nothing to disclose or no conflicts of interest regarding this educational talk. I am a lifelong hobbyist, which I'll get into a little bit, and it's helped me at various times and still does at various times in my life when I go through challenging times and hardships of day-to-day life. And no offense to cats or any other types of emotional support animals, but I will most often probably reference dogs when discussing emotional support animals as it applies to them because of the numbers, just sheer numbers out there, the historical roots and underpinnings. The research is kind of geared more towards canines, and then therapy and service dogs also trend to canines. So no offense to cats, but that's kind of the talk tonight. So I do myself have a beloved dog. He's a schnoodle named Snickers, who I consider an unofficial emotional support animal for both my wife and I. You might hear him every once in a while. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And I doubt anybody will disagree with me on this, but we're in the midst of very stressful times. The stress seems to kind of keep building with various stressors out there in day-to-day life. And this is one of the more comprehensive surveys that they do in the country every 4 years or so through the American Psychological Association. They did it in 2019, and then they last did it in 2023. So it'll probably be repeated in another year or two. But basically, this is an in-depth, comprehensive study that they survey over 3,000 people. And this survey confirmed that our nation is kind of grappling with enduring psychological effects of the pandemic and what they called collective trauma. Um, and a lot of Americans are facing stressors, and 25% of adults report experiencing high levels of stress in the past month. Um, and compared to their previous comprehensive study in 2019, the levels have increased in certain age groups. Probably a lot of the people on this call tonight are in those two age groups that I'm showing there. Sources of stress, no big surprise, could be school, work, financial, health, both mental and physical, relationships, and current events. The impact of stress is many. It can impact our physical, mental health. It can lead to problems with sleep, problems with headaches, anxiety. Interesting findings from this study from the American Psychological Association. Women report higher stress levels than men, close to about a half a point there. Patients and adults with children have higher stress levels. Adults with lower incomes and those living in urban areas experience more stress. And interestingly, there were some regional differences too, with more stress in the Midwest and the South, interestingly. Like I said, stress, especially chronic stress, can lead to a variety of chronic health conditions, both mental and physical. Since the pandemic's onset, about 58% of people experienced this in 2023. We mentioned the financial and economic stress and the parental stress. Bottom line, these findings underscore the pressing need for accessible mental health support and treatment, but also, as they put it, effective stress management techniques and strategies to address the ongoing challenges in America today. So I'm going to hopefully talk to you about two of those potential stress mitigation strategies and hobbies and emotional support animals. So now we're going to kind of work our way into hobbies. I also consider that as a passion type of activity. Passion defined as a deep, intense, enduring enthusiasm or dedication towards something that brings you meaning, fulfillment, excitement. There's a strong emotional connection, typically intrinsic motivation, and a willingness to invest time, effort, and resources, even in the face of challenges. There's a wide variety of passions and hobbies out there, as we'll probably see tonight. Educational, career pursuits, hobbies, like we'll talk about a lot, relationships, personal causes. And it can be what pushes the boundaries a little bit to help us persist through difficulties, find joy in the process rather than just the outcome. There's a famous psychiatrist, Viktor Frankl, who basically discovered a type of therapy called logotherapy, which is finding the source of meaning in anything that you find yourself doing. Okay, first interactive question. I'm going to kind of pay attention to the chat. A little bit of American history. Can anyone tell me who the president two over from the right with the bespectacles is? This guy right here.
You're welcome to unmute yourself and speak up if you'd like to answer Dr. Resch's question. I don't think I'll answer it.
Do you know, Bethany?
I believe it's Teddy Roosevelt, isn't it?
Yep, we'll go with that one. It is none other than Theodore Teddy Roosevelt. So he was affectionately known as Teddy or TR. He was the 26th president of the United States, serving some important years there, 1901 to 1909. He himself was a very strong advocate for leading a well-rounded life filled with intellectual and physical pursuits. He believed that hobbies were essential for personal growth, mental well-being, and building character. His philosophy emphasized an active, curious mind and a variety of interests that made life richer and more fulfilling. And his own life serves as an example of this, how hobbies can contribute to his own success and happiness as a president. He was a man, who talked the talk, walked the walk. He was a voracious reader. Amazingly, he read a book a day, even while he was president, which seems pretty impressive. He was big into hunting and exploring. He traveled all over the globe, but he also helped found the National History and Conservation, which was basically the start of our national park system. He wrote over 35 books, and a younger Teddy Roosevelt was into boxing and judo at Harvard, and he actually did some boxing even as a president. So here he is reading as a president. Here he is out hunting somewhere in a book. And this is the young Theodore Roosevelt at Harvard on their boxing team back in the day. So looking pretty fit there. And pretty much every US president has had a hobby that gets chronicled in print and in videos. And it kind of makes sense. That's a stressful job. You've probably all seen those pictures where presidents age throughout their term and sometimes very dramatically. I remember seeing some pictures of Abraham Lincoln from the start of his presidency to the end. He aged tremendously because of all the stress going on with the Civil War and emancipation and the like. So this is another fun question. I'm anxious to see if anybody can come up with this answer. I did not know it, for the record, before I put this talk together and did a deep dive in it. But does anybody know why it's called hobby in the first place? Via chat, or feel free to unmute, as Bethany said.
Anybody? I admit, I don't know.
Anybody want to take a wild guess? I think before hobby, when I look at the literature and the um, history, I think they used to call it avocation for quite some time until it gave way to hobby. So believe it or not, hobby comes from this probably thing that we've all seen, the hobby horse. And again, I did not know the hobby horse is an up and coming sport in not only America, but the country and the world. There's hobby horse associations and groups all over, including internationally. They have an international competition of hobby horsing, and it gets pretty competitive. They truly do show jumping, dressage, gets pretty competitive. It actually gets really high marks in certain communities for inclusivity, as well as helping certain individuals with autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, to help with interpersonal relationships and social skills. So it's kind of an up and coming thing, and it all kind of stems around this hobby horse. But back to the definition. Back in the day, hobby horse, you've probably all seen them, was, and it still is, a child's toy, a small horse-shaped figure or stick that the child would ride on for, hours at a time. And I even plugged this in Amazon the other day, and it came up with 707 results of hobby horses, way more than I thought. But I think it has to be a reflection of this hobby horsing sport. But in the 1500s, people started to lose the avocation, which is kind of a mouthful, and people started using hobby horse metaphorically to say, hey, that's your hobby horse thing that you like to do, your pastime, your activity outside of work that you would do. Another couple hundred years, in the 1800s, they just shortened it once again to hobby, referring to any leisure activity done for pleasure outside of work. So now a hobby is anything we do for fun, just like a child used to ride and still does ride their hobby horses. So that's the story behind the word hobby. So I always think it's fun. We already kind of mentioned Teddy Roosevelt's hobbies and outside interests beyond his work, but it's really interesting to see some other famous people in history. So Albert Einstein was a very good violinist. Winston Churchill, interestingly, a very famous figure in history. He kind of combined a cerebral activity like painting, oil painting there, as well as a very physical activity, bricklaying. And I almost didn't believe the bricklaying, but I looked it up, and it's very true. He would go out and build walls, and he was actually part of a guild or a union in England, and he found great solace in it and was pretty good at it. I'm kind of thinking it was like a predecessor to almost Legos or something. But Marie Curie, who was a very famous chemist, physicist, for her work in radioactivity. She won a Nobel Prize. She was an avid cyclist. Apparently, after her wedding to this man here, their honeymoon was spent bicycling all over France. Benjamin Franklin, another American historic person, he, like Churchill, had a physical swimming as well as a cerebral hobby as chess, as you can see him playing there. Mahatma Gandhi loved walking, spinning yarn, and Beethoven would take long walks in nature, which he thought helped his creativity when he composed and produced music. Other examples of people and their hobbies, which is kind of fun. I know Bethany is similar to Einstein. She was a very good violinist. I think she was in an
Similar
orchestra
to
at one.
Einstein? I don't know if I believe that. Thank you.
She used to be in an orchestra. I actually saw her play at a conference in Cincinnati, and you could have heard a pin drop in that conference hall because she was that good. It kind of silenced the crowd. Co-founder Henry Nasrallah, I talked to him recently at a conference, and he has hundreds of cufflinks, hundreds of ties that he gets great joy from. I think he said he had like 3,000 books. He loves to play Scrabble, which isn't that big of a surprise because he's a prolific author. And he walks over 10,000 steps a day to stay healthy. I myself, I love sports. I've been collecting sports cards since I was about 5 or 6, still do. I've kind of transferred it over to history. I like historical autographs. I'll write people that I like and respect, trying to get them that way. If not, I'll look for them in other ways. Now, I grew up on a farm, so I rode dirt bikes back then, still ride dirt bikes, still ride four-wheelers off-road with my buddies on weekends and holidays and that sort of thing. So those are kind of my hobbies still to this day that help me a lot. More famous people, obviously, I'm sure we have some Taylor Swift fans out there. She's got multiple hobbies: baking, cooking, reading, knitting, journaling. Ed Sheeran, the musician, vocalist, he's big into Legos. Apparently, he does Legos on the tour. He finds them that they calm him down. He actually has a famous song called Lego House there. And Beyonce truly does keep bees and beekeeping on her homestead. So another interactive question, feel free to put it in the chat or just unmute and speak it. But I'd like to hear what some of the hobbies are of other attendings in the Zoom call tonight, if you don't mind sharing that with me. And I did want to share some evidence. Again, I hadn't taken a deep dive into hobbies and recreational activities until I was prepping for this talk. And I didn't know how much or how little I would find, but I was actually pleasantly surprised how much evidence there is out there. It's large and growing on the health benefits of engaging in hobbies, no matter what it is. I'll tell you some nuances here in a little bit that the research shows us, but when you look at it, again, it's a wide breadth of hobbies and activities. There's no single unifying framework to explain how leisure activities affect health. Some more physical, some more mental, some more humanistic, some not. And this is my favorite researcher that I was alluding to with Megan. She's a psychologist out of England. A lot of this research comes out of England, interestingly. But she characterized the fact that the mechanism of actions, the reason why they're helpful, can be multifactorial, some psychological, some biological, some social, some behavioral, at different levels, individually, group, societal, macro levels. And this is the lady that I encourage you to look up, Megan. She's very heavily interested in visual arts herself. And talks a lot about it. Here's art to support health, as you're saying. And this is one of my favorite articles that she wrote in 2022 that shows the multiple mechanisms involved. And through this work, she's and her team has identified over 600, believe it or not, mechanisms of action in which leisure engagement activities can affect health and health behaviors through this complex network of psychological, biological, social, behavioral processes. Sometimes in psychiatry, we call that the biopsychosocial aspects of things. And she, as such, proposed a multi-level leisure mechanisms framework, which she kind of put out into the scientific community and hopes to build upon that for years to come. But probably no single mechanism will ever be able to capture every single hobby out there. I did pull out about 7, I think, as it applies more to the biopsychosocial realms that we look at in mental health and psychiatry. And we really do think that these activities, hobbies, can both physically and functionally change the brain and improve cognitive function, emotional regulation, and mental well-being. One way they can do that would be through neuroplasticity, through strengthening neural connections through the synapses and dendrites and how they communicate. And especially if you try new things that you haven't tried before, like a language, a new musical instrument, strategy games, to enhance synapses that you might not have been using a whole lot of. And it just strengthens those networks, neural networks, and creates neuroplasticity in a healthy way. We also know that certain hobbies, and that's why it's probably nice to have a mix, as did Churchill, as did Benjamin Franklin. Some that work more on the gray matter, like chess, painting, helping more with the higher executive function, like memory, problem solving, as well as the white matter, more like motor skills, coordination, and engagement, like a musical instrument or learning a new skill. This is also a big one, dopamine release. We'll talk about dopamine again in the emotional support animal side, but we know dopamine is a really important neurotransmitter in the certain area of the brain called nucleus accumbens, that it activates our pleasure reward pathway, giving us microbursts of dopamine, which helps us feel better, be more motivated, experience pleasure, and helps us learn too. And it just reinforces the behaviors that we do to get those microbursts of dopamine. This is a big one, stress reduction and lower cortisol levels. The stress hormone is cortisol. Too high of a cortisol level can create a chronic stress environment, which isn't healthy physically or mentally. And relaxing activities like meditation, yoga, knitting. I'm surprised how popular knitting is when I talk to people. It's like making a comeback. Painting reduces cortisol levels if you were to measure it in your serum or in your urine. And with this chronic stress environment that you sometimes see in certain conditions like PTSD and things, it can actually shrink the hippocampus. But hobbies can reverse this shrinkage to help protect and regenerate this brain region, much like antidepressants can and do, much like treatments like ECT can and do regenerate the hippocampal region. Enhanced memory and cognitive function, especially that kind of higher level stuff, learning, memory retrieval, puzzles, writing, crosswords, again, increase that all important hippocampal volume and slow cognitive decline. Look at this study in 2023 that says lifelong hobbies reduces the lifetime risk of Alzheimer's disease and dementia in non-stroke individuals. So that's pretty powerful work there. We mentioned the dopamine piece, but also improved emotional regulation via this prefrontal cortex, which helps us regulate our moods. And hobbies that require concentration, problem solving, etc., help that region. Journaling, music, therapy-based art helps process and regulate mood disorders. We actually have art therapy in a lot of our programs at the place I work. We have an art therapist, so that's a good example of that. Finally, there's this network of brain regions we call the default mode network, and it needs to be kind of kept in a happy, normal range. If it's too high, you get problems. Too low, you get problems. And hobbies like gardening, painting, meditation engage this complex network of brain activity and keep it into a more healthy level. And when you drop the activity, it helps with anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, things of that nature that are affected by the default mode network. So this is research from a couple years ago. And so those are some of the mechanisms. There's some other studies I just want to point out to the group This is a study that came out, I think, 2 years ago, which was a very large study. Look at that, 93,000 people across the globe they looked at, 65 and older, mind you, that studied hobby engagement and mental well-being. In every location, participants with hobbies reported fewer symptoms of depression, greater health, happiness, and life satisfaction than participants without hobbies. And I found other studies very similar to this. So the specific pastime didn't matter as much as the fact that you were engaged in one. So you can go all over the place. And like I said, I was pleasantly surprised of the wealth of studies out there to show significant benefits in physical and mental health. So I would encourage you to look at Fancourt, Mac, other researchers. This is an interesting one by Krekel. And Krekel talks about the pro-sociality of hobbies, and that can help be a distinguishing factor on how they help us. And his study was one of our highest pure studies or gold standard study, randomized controlled trial, people with hobbies, people without, and they compared them. And it evaluated exploring what matters. And participants in the course experienced substantial improvement in several areas with hobbies and personal well-being, statistically significant, better mental health, reduced depression to the tune of about 50% standard deviation, and anxiety 42%. Here's that pro-sociality, pro-social behavior, enhanced levels of compassion and social trust, indicating that engaging in an activity promoted these behaviors for societal cohesion. So really important stuff. It underscores the profound impact that engaging in meaningful activities can have on our health. So here's kind of the breakdown of showing the different groups. The pink is the treatment group, the control group in the purple there, and you saw differences in those key metrics or key primary measures. And this is one I recently heard on NPR, and then I kind of looked at it a little bit more in depth by Castello and others. And I think somebody I briefly saw in the chat saying that cell phones can distract us. And that was very astute, whoever put that. In this kind of study, basically turned off your internet from your cell phones when you were not working or going to school. And I think it was for 2 weeks or 4 weeks. And the people that turned off the internet on their smartphones were happier. They had improvements in attention, mental health, and well-being. So this author, third author, said it was because they were engaged in more real-life activities. They called it IRL, in real life. And participants that spent more time in real life gravitated more towards their hobbies, which we're talking about today, talking to people face-to-face, going out in nature, like Beethoven, getting more sleep, feeling more social connected, like Krekel said, and felt just more in control over their lives and their decisions. So this is just literally a couple months old if you want to check that one out. So as we wrap up this section, I just want to kind of end up on, hey, potentially getting started, or if you already have a hobby, good for you, keep doing it. The more, the better, add some hobbies. Consider adding new wrinkles to it, taking it to the next level, whatever that might be for your particular hobby, or adding a social element to it, like Krekel said, to get more of that pro-social behaviors out of it. If you don't have a hobby, I would say, you should seriously think about getting one or more than one. Certainly you can identify your interests. Think back on what's excited you throughout your lifetime. Is it more the physical, mental, creative part, what have you? A lot of people reflect on what, excited them in childhood, similar to that hobby horse mentality. I know in COVID, when we were all quarantined, people pulled out old hobbies, board games, sports cards collecting went through the roof, Pokemon collecting went through the roof, because it was stuff they used to do that got brought out again. So that's an area of potential there. And there's a couple studies I found saying that you try to make it different than what you're studying or what you're working, because it's a little bit more effective and potentially beneficial, because it goes back to that neuroplasticity, working different parts of your brain and neurons that wouldn't otherwise be worked. Start small and simple. You always have to start somewhere. Try not to get kind of stuck in the fact that you have to be a beginner, a novice to move up the ladder of expertise. If you want to paint, start with something basic like watercolors and paper, or paint by numbers rather than going into the more extensive oil canvas paintings type of thing. So try to set realistic expectations and don't put too much pressure on yourself, because that kind of counteracts the whole reason why you're doing it, to help decrease stress. Try it before you commit. You could attend a workshop, take a trial class, watch all kinds of online tutorials. You can borrow ski equipment, borrow golf clubs before you have to invest in them, just to kind of try things out. Make it convenient, especially if you have sketchbooks around your residence, a guitar near your couch. Find times that work best to do your hobbies. Typically, for most people, that's probably going to be early or late evening. Join a community. That's probably more easily done than ever before with some of the social media stuff, meetup stuff. And some of these are very social. Dancing, hiking, board games can be really easy to get involved with. Embrace the learning process, like I said before. Be a beginner and move up. It's the process and not the destination. It's the process and journey, not the destination. Try not to compare yourself. Celebrate the small wins and improvements, not aiming for perfection. And lastly, just stay flexible. If the hobby doesn't feel right, no big deal. Just go on to the next one. You can totally switch. You're like I do, depending on the season. I'll go back and forth between my two main hobbies, depending on the weather or what's going on. So, and again, back to some of the study, Kelly and others, the more it can help develop certain parts of your brain, probably the better in terms of overall health benefit. So with that, we're going to switch over to the second half of the lecture, moving from our passion projects to our companionship. And that brings us to the emotional support animals. And I specifically chose this graphic and this slide with this dachshund here because it really highlights the main emphasis of an emotional support animal. They provide us support, emotional companionship, emotional regulation, etc., as we'll see. So briefly in the chat, or anybody want to kind of just raise their hand that I can see who all has an emotional support animal already on the call tonight? I'm sure there's some out there. So okay. Oh, Megan has a service dog. Okay, we're gonna briefly talk about service dogs, as that's one of those things I want to kind of keep straight in terms of terminology. So that'll be good. Daughter trained her boxer to be a therapy dog. Okay, another step up. Great. We'll talk about that. Okay. So this animal connection, I will tell you, it's ingrained in us and it's ingrained in the animals to a certain extent through evolution. Uh, Prehistoric times, we think that at some point our ancestors started to interact with animals in a way that benefited them. Probably 10 to 14,000 years ago. This is an archaeological dig. The first time they started to find rock carvings with dogs carved into the wall that were helping humans in basically modern day Saudi Arabia. And this is an amplified version of, you can see the dogs there. But they all kind of stem from this common ancestor, the Canis lupus gray wolf. And as our ancestors migrated across the globe, they started to breed out different lines and different breeds. And, they were there for a lot of things. They helped in tracking, hunting, guarding, and just companionship. And ultimately, the humans, our ancestors, started to breed them certain ways for size, speed, strength, but also for human social skills and being able to communicate better with them. And we call that emotional evolution. that dogs were able to interact and communicate with humans when they were bred out that way. And it all kind of laid the foundation for establishing this human dog bond that's still found a lot today and relished. In recent years, we've seen higher rates of pet ownership, higher rates of pet industry revenue. Again, I'm probably not telling you anything you're not surprised by. So that was evolutionary process, but the whole animal assisted industry and therapies kind of really took another bump in the 60s by this psychologist. He was a private practice psychologist in New York, and his dog there, Jingles, in the 60s. And he started to realize when his dog Jingles was in the room, people were more active in their therapy, typically kids. And he kind of just by observation, and he coined it pet therapy. And he wrote a book 5 years. He coined pet therapy in 64, wrote a book on it in 69. And all of this kind of helped lay the groundwork for the therapeutic purposes of animals of all kinds. And this is a very touching dedication in the book that he made to Jingles, and clearly states a very clear, strong emotional bond between Levinson and Jingles there, if you have a time to read that. So all this work kind of laid the groundwork for this animal assisted interventions. And granted, it can be all kinds of different animals. Like I said, equine therapy, cats, felines, etc. But we're going to kind of trend towards dogs, like I said before. And also, I think this is very important for people that don't have therapy dogs, for people that don't have service dogs, to know the big difference, because I think a lot of times they're used interchangeably, and that leads to confusion and problems there, challenges. So we're going to focus on emotional support animal, but I think I want to also at least define therapy animal, service animal. So we're going to start with emotional support animal intended to support, hence it's in the name, the needs of the individuals with a disability or mental health diagnosis for companionship, support, emotional regulation, etc. They are not required to undergo any specialized training, no form of socialization or obedience things. There's no evaluations technically. It can be any kind of dog, cat, rabbit, ferret, bird, reptile. Some people will get very creative or have in the past. To designate your animal as an emotional support animal, you just need a letter from a medical practitioner or mental health professional for an emotional support animal letter, which we'll hit briefly. With this letter, it protects the animal and the owner under two acts: the Fair Housing Amendment Act, that allows you to get a pet waiver even for places that don't allow pets. And then at a certain time, you could bring that dog on certain airplanes, called the Air Carrier Access Act, but they're not granted other accesses that we'll talk about later with a service dog. And I don't mean this in a bad way or in a condescending way, but this is the lowest bar needed to achieve the defined category compared to the other two by far. Essentially, you just need a letter. Next up, and I think somebody said they had a therapy dog trained. These therapy dogs specifically they're trained to provide comfort to a large number of people, not a single person. Comfort, socialization, places like nursing homes, hospitals, rehab centers, schools, etc. This does require training, testing, and certification by a regulatory organization. Typically, they also have formal obedience training from a liability standpoint that you're not going to see with the emotional support animal. These animals are not protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. They are only allowed into places where they have been invited to be and work. So emotional support animals are kind of the low bar. This is the middle. And the highest bar, I think somebody said they have a service animal or service dog. And technically, only a dog can be a service animal. This handler, again, owner must have a documented disability or mental health diagnosis. The dog goes through very rigorous formal training to help with the disability, whatever it is. Eyesight impairment, seizure response dog, diabetic alert dog, psychiatry, PTSD dog, autism assistance dog, mobility assistance, etc. There's extensive training, probably 18 to 24 months on average. I couldn't find an exact cost, but I know it's expensive depending on where you go and what type you get. It could run, 6 figures easily. They do require and receive obedience training, socialization, public access training, and task specific training. This is the only one of the three categories that we're hitting tonight that is protected under the American with Disabilities Act. That's important because that means that service dog can go anywhere where the handler can go, general public, so restaurants, churches, schools, planes, etc. So this is the highest bar set for the owner and animal to reach, and with that, it gives you more accessibility. So definitely more involved, as you can see when you see it broken down, than an emotional support animal. And this is a side-by-side comparison. You see any animal can be an emotional support animal. Only a trained dog can be a service dog. So big difference there. And you see at the bottom the different things that affords. Traveling and housing for the one, and basically unlimited legal protection through the Americans with Disability Act on the service animal side. So back to the emotional support animal, whatever it might be, it's a companion animal. Like I said, it gives a lot of comfort, emotional stability, and therapeutic benefits to individuals with mental or emotional conditions, which can be very important and life-changing and life-stabilizing. So no doubt. They can and do play a role in mental health treatment and what we call treatment or therapeutic plans, but I want to make a point to say they're not to substitute for professional treatments or talk therapy or medications. They are basically complementary to that and augment those. So much like hobbies, they benefit us as humans in many different ways, reducing the anxiety and stress levels. And you'll see a lot of overlap between what I said about hobbies and emotional support animals. This is one that probably is better on this side. They can provide companionship to combat loneliness and isolation. And that was huge in the heights of the pandemic with quarantine and things. We didn't realize how important contact and social stuff was. So it offers a sense of routine and responsibility that can be really helpful in all of our lives, and helping individuals better manage. Probably the most evidence is out there for major depression, generalized anxiety disorder, probably PTSD, and you still see some other research done in schizophrenia and other mental health disorders. So we do think it helps reduce depression, anxiety, and stress, probably most. Can help prevent panic attacks and high blood pressure. Again, this goes back to decreased cortisol levels. The purring of a cat releases natural opioid-like endorphins in our brain to kind of help calm us and CNS depress. Sitting with your pet, stroking it, or grooming them can bring about a sense of calm as well. Playing games with your pet can distract you from negative thoughts or ruminations. Humans, just like I said, it's kind of ingrained in us from our ancestors, prehistoric times to now, have this basic need for contact, and animals are able to fill this need with unlimited, practically mutual affection. They're always happy to see you, always happy to be with you. So again, back to some overlap here, but that stress response system, as evidenced by cortisol, we see lower levels in pet ownership, pet interactions, decreased heart rate, decreased blood pressure, less hyperarousal, less stress, less response. This is a huge one when you talk about emotional support animals. This is called the love hormone, the love neuropeptide called oxytocin. Typically, we see spikes in this at birth, at breastfeeding, at intercourse. And this is the same thing that's kind of released when we interact and catch gaze with our pets and pet them and interact with them. That oxytocin comes out, which is why we bond with them so tightly and helps calm us and regulate us. And there's other things too. We mentioned dopamine in the hobby section, but in dopamine, endorphins, oxytocin are the most probably studied when it comes to emotional support animals. And we already kind of mentioned the importance of companionship. Pets have this endless joy and unconditional love they bring to us. They reduce feelings of loneliness and isolation, which can be really problematic. And they can be pro-social, again, back to that Krekel study. They kind of serve as a bridge to us and others to help us kind of interact with them, whether it be at a park, on a walk, at the vet's office, or at an animal group. And they kind of help promote that social behavior, like Fancourt said was important. It can give you purpose that you might not have without a pet. They rely on you for so much, food, water, exercise, socializing. There's almost like a parent-child bond and attachment. You have to get up and take care of your dog, cat, whatever. You need to be there for them, and vice versa. It's kind of a reciprocal, symbiotic, synergistic relationship. Depression kind of amotivates. It's part of the criteria. But doing a small task then motivates you to do more. One of the fundamental tenets of what we call behavioral activation. You start with small steps and then build to bigger ones. And just taking care of your animal is a good step to other things to take care of yourself better. So caring for a pet can build confidence and independence, provide senses of achievement, and build that all-important momentum, and even provide new opportunities to tie it back into the first half. Hobbies, dog agility, walking groups, dog competitions. My wife and I do a 5K for dogs and humans, which is great. It's fun. So as we wrap up here on this section, to qualify your animal as an emotional support animal, again, I'll stress they do not require specialized training, testing, certification, but they must be prescribed by a licensed medical professional via this letter called an emotional support animal letter. And with that, they're protected under the Fair Housing Act, that landlords must open up that place for the pet and their owner. And then there's a key breakdown here. In December of 2020, it got a lot harder to take them on planes, because we'll talk why, but that's the Air Carrier Access Act. But January of 2021, it became a lot harder. So right now it's still kind of goes, it's very hard. So I would just say each airline has its own policy regarding emotional support animals. Some just view them as pets, nothing more, nothing less, and not always in the cabin. So it's important, if you're looking to travel with an emotional support animal, reach out to the airline ahead of time to understand what their rules, what their requirements are, what the fees are, before you just assume, because it's a lot harder now than it was 2020 and before. So again, they're not granted access to public places like a service dog would be. To qualify, a person must have a diagnosed mental health condition, i.e. in our DSM-5 manual or the World Health Organization International Classification of Disease, and they have to have this prescription or letter from a licensed physician or a mental health professional capable of making a diagnosis. And I always put that in my letter, what the diagnosis is and how the animal helps the person. I will tell you, not every medical professional will do this, thinking there's some liability potentially. Not all will or feel comfortable, so it's not always a given. If they were to agree to it, it needs to be on professional letterhead. They need to hold a license in the state that you live, because that's the housing, restriction, or the housing act that you're under, or your state. And they have to put in the exact disorder and how it can help, how the ESA can help them. Really, any licensed physician can. These are the mental health professionals, just to give you some other options, and their degrees at the end. So psychologist, licensed clinical social worker, licensed professional counselor, etc. They can all provide these letters if it's warranted. Obviously, there are a few ethical and practical considerations. Not all animals are suited to be ESA, dogs or cats or whatever. Temperament really matters. You have to be a responsible pet owner in terms to ensure the well-being of both the animal and the owner. You don't want to um, take advantage of anything. They need to be vaccinated. They need to have their shots. They need to have regular vet care. They need to have reasonable obedience. Sometimes in the past, they've been very disruptive on flights, and that was one of the reasons that got led to those restrictions that I alluded to in December of 2020. That's really clamped down on how often and what is considered an emotional support animal. And like I said, that led to a lot of these misrepresentations, led to a lot of changes in the airline industry. So that all happened in December of 2020. Now it's just kind of their pets, and you have to pay extra and potentially not in the cabin. And the reasons cited were people were taking advantage of it. There was this famous pet peacock that an artist tried to bring in as an emotional support animal. It was ultimately denied, but got a lot of press. There were several pigs that got on as ESAs and created a disruption and got taken off flights. There was turkey. I think there were miniature horses. It just, for lack of a better word, got a little out of hand, and it started to blur and allow access to people that really needed it. The hearing or the eyesight impaired, or the people with true high level service dogs, which is very different than an ESA. So everything changed after that. So as we wrap up, I was talking to one of my patients, real world example, and obviously there's nothing confidential here, and she gave me permission. I'm not going to use her name, but I was telling her about, pets and the importance, and she pulled out, she's like, yeah, my dog Dexter is registered. And I said, oh, that's awesome. She had this card that she carries around. On the back of the card, it explains the Air Carrier Access Act and the Fair Housing Amendments Act that we alluded to. And I said, hey, do you mind sending me an email, kind of what this Dexter means to you? And she was so graciously, she did this. And she kind of explained why she did the formal card. She paid some money for that, but she also got a letter from me at one time for an apartment. But the one thing I wanted to point out that really, I don't know, brought it home for me was this red part. Dexter's been with her for 13 years. He is her safe place. He's been through a lot of trauma and bad things with her. And he's a bit too old to be super protective, but she knows he's always there in any way he can be. Sometimes just hugging him and breathing him in helps her. I'd be lost in life without him, that's for sure. And that kind of epitomizes what an emotional support animal does to her and many people with them. So, and she gave me permission to use this in tonight's talk. So with that, we'll wrap up. Again, there's some definite overlaps between these two subjects. They're not as far off as you think when you first look at them. There's a lot of overlap there on how they help us and how they improve our lives. Hobbies can reduce stress, depression, anxiety, other mental health concerns. Hobbies play a role in maintaining mental health, well-being, resilience, which is huge, stability in day-to-day life. ESAs can be life-changing for individuals like my patient struggling with mental health issues. They don't substitute for professional treatment, but complement it, like we said. Granted, the effectiveness of ESAs can vary from individual to individual. Not everybody likes dogs or cats like the next person. And they can be very valuable emotionally and physically, but you need to understand the differences in terms of the legal status, responsibilities, and rights an ESA is given compared to the therapy dog and the service dog. So with that, be happy to answer any questions or get any comments from anybody.